Alien abductions is, as Russell's just said about 5 minutes ago, the subject of my presentation this morning. The way it was going on, I thought I wasn't going to have to come up here. I was going to tell you all about it on my behalf anyway. So thank you for that, Russ. Russ mentioned a little thing that I'm not going to talk about in the Alien autopsy film. He is right in saying that the movie is in production, starring Ant and Dec. It's going to be a little bit of a comedy, as you might imagine. But it also stars the American actor Bill Pullman. And just like to allay any rumours that Billy Connolly will not be playing Malcolm Robinson's part, and Danny DeVito will not taking my part either. But as he's rightly said, as Russ, it shows the interest in the subject, and it travels far and wide. I think Russ was on Radio 4 recently, and they were trying to say to him, look, there is no interest, it's dead. And I think we all know in this room here today that that's incorrect. Now, one of the things Russell mentioned was the fact about alien abductions from a sceptical point of view. The skeptics will tell us that, you know, alien abductions, they always happen in America. It's always in some faraway place, the middle of nowhere, there's no witnesses, you know, and it's some, you know, poor unfortunate redneck that it happens to, and so on. So quite a number of years ago now, sort of the mid 1980s, I decided to look at the abduction scenario from a UK point of view, and it was soon, you know, fairly easy to see that that was quite the opposite. That the people who report these incidents, you know, wouldn't stand out in a crowd. They are everyday members of the public, could be you or I. They're not sensation-seeking, money-hungry people. In fact, the vast majority of them don't want their names mentioned in public. They don't want any publicity. Thankfully, there are one or two that will go on the record and are brave enough to stand up and face the music, so to speak. And that these incidents are bizarre in every sense of the word. And to start the presentation, I can't think of a better example of this type of incident and the ramifications it can have if you do go on the record. And that deals with Police Constable Alan Godfrey. Now, this happened a number of years back now in Todmorden in West Yorkshire, and at the time Police Constable Godfrey was actually on duty in his patrol car. So this is not the middle of nowhere, this is a serving police officer. Now we're going to start with a short video. It's a little bit of a reconstruction of what happened to Alan, and then we're going to take it from there and look at some other incidents. If we could run the video now, please.
Todmorden, buried deep between windswept Pennine moorlands. Obscure, isolated, and the epicenter of UFO activity in the British Isles. A tenth of sightings are around this town alone. Our story begins with a discovery in a coal yard which even now, more than 10 years on, remains a mystery.
He's up there.
Alan Godfrey, at the time a constable in the Todmorden police force, was called to the scene.
He wasn't there a few hours ago.
Lying on top of a pile of coal was a man, dead.
He had this terrifying expression. I can only describe it as whatever he last saw really terrified him. There was no footprints belonging to him, disturbance on the coal. So, how did he get up there, you know? I couldn't work out. I could see that on the top of his head there were individual burn marks. And at the back of the neck there was a rather large weeping type of burn, and there'd been like an ointment smeared on it.
The dead man was Zygmunt Adamski, a retired miner, who disappeared 5 days earlier from a town 20 miles away. The coroner had to record an open verdict. He's still baffled by the questions surrounding the case, like what was the substance on the dead man's neck?
We had the substance analysed, and the toxicologists and the scientists couldn't come up with any answers to what it was. And we came up against a blank at every line of investigation. This was one of the most puzzling cases that I've come across in 25 years. If somebody proved to me that UFOs exist and that there was one around there at that time, and that in some way we could associate it with this case, then perhaps I might say I'd only raise half an eyebrow.
What strengthens the belief in a UFO link is that so many others have also seen things that simply defy explanation. On the moors above Todmorden, next to what's said to be the highest bus stop in Britain, is the Deer Play Inn. One night in 1989, the landlady awoke to see an amazing sight.
Well, I never took UFOs seriously at all. Till one night my husband came in to the bedroom and I was asleep. And he came in and said, "Come on, look at this, Val." And I came into the lounge and I saw this light behind that cottage there. It went right across the moor. It went about 50 miles an hour, came on the car park and lit the car park up like it was daylight. Absolutely, like daylight. I can't believe it. I just don't know. My husband said to me, "Well, explain that," and I can't explain it.
A few miles away, at about 7 o'clock one evening last August, Joanne Elledge, Sarah Wolfenden and Amy Connolly were out with friends.
We were just walking up the road, along the road, and one of our friends said, "You know, what's that over there?" and jumped on the wall. So we just got on the wall and had a look, and it was just like behind us, just above the forest, and it just seemed to be hovering, and watched it for about 10 minutes.
It was a saucer shape, it was oval, with red and green lights all around the bottom, and it was silent, it weren't making any noise at all.
We couldn't believe that there was something there that weren't an aeroplane or a helicopter or anything like that. We knew it wasn't a normal aircraft or anything. Yeah, we just couldn't say anything, just kept watching that. Like grabbing hold of each other, what is it? We couldn't believe it.
But the most extraordinary story must be that of Alan Godfrey, the policeman who made the find on the coal heap. 5 months later, he was on duty early one morning when there were reports of cows loose on a council estate.
I've been sent to investigate this herd of cows. So I was driving up the road here, and I was going to turn right up Fernley Road there to the council estate when I could see in front of me up here this object. It looked to be completely blocking the road. As I get nearer and nearer towards this object, I could see that it wasn't quite what I was expecting to meet 5 o'clock or whatever on a November morning in Tomedin. It was diamond-shaped. The bottom half of the object was spinning. It was hovering about 5 foot off the ground, and I could see underneath it. It was about 20 feet wide, 14 feet high.
Alpha Bravo 3 to Alpha Bravo Control. Message, over. Try HQ.
I tried that several times and it just didn't work. I just couldn't contact anybody. So I picked my clipboard up and I started drawing a sketch of it. And then suddenly, I was at the other side of the object and it had gone. It had, was like another 50, 100 yards of field road driving.
What's up? You're not going to believe what I've just seen. Oh, get in.
Okay.
So we got out of the car and we examined the road surface, which was like a whirlpool dry. Something really hot had been hovering above there. We could see all these loose leaves and broken branches there, so he was convinced something had been there. We thought it might have gone in, this object, wherever it had gone, it might have gone into the adjoining park. We climbed into the park because the gates were locked and we had to climb across the river. When we got in there, we could see this herd of cows right in the middle of the rugby pitch. It had been raining all night, but there's no hoof prints belonging to them. How they got there, it just looked as though, plop, somebody dropped them there, you know?
It sounds incredible, but Alan Godfrey isn't the only one who saw something in the same area on the same night. Another witness was school caretaker Leonard Smith.
When I came round the corner to check the grounds, I looked up in the sky and this UFO was up in the sky, approximately over where I later learnt the area where Alan Godfrey had his experience. I didn't know at the time. Now the object shot across the valley 4 times, backwards and forwards, and it vanished over the hills.
Then there's John Porter, one of 5 other police witnesses that night. An hour before Alan Godfrey's encounter, he was out searching moorland quarries for stolen motorbikes.
We're walking down the moor from the main road. Something told me to turn round. I turned, and in the sky was a very cold steel blue light. It moved in a sweeping arc across the sky, about 12 miles, I would estimate, in 1 second. Eventually I went up the road and observed this same cold steel blue light sweeping away in a low arc towards Todmorden, and that's the last I saw of it.
Despite this support, Alan Godfrey became more and more troubled by the most puzzling part of his experience.
After it had all happened, I realised that there was half an hour missing from me drawing the object to me turning up at the other side of where the object had been. I was really curious, you know, I wanted to know what had happened in that half hour.
I persuaded him to undergo regression hypnosis, and 2 experiments were set up with 2 doctors who specialised in hypnosis. The hypnotic regression sessions were videotaped, and during them Alan fills in the missing time, the gaps in his memory. Alan describes getting out of his car, looking at the object. Then he sees a light emanating from underneath it, so he gets back into his car, finds his car won't go, and then he's engulfed in a bright white light.
There's a light. Shining a light.
He appears to lose consciousness. He says everything is black. He then wakes up in a room where he sees a tall man. He's also surrounded by 6 small robots.
Pardon?
It's not horrible.
Who's horrible?
They are.
Who's they?
I want to talk about them.
He's made the subject of some sort of pseudo-medical examination. In due course, he's put back in his car.
But Alan Godfrey himself admits he doesn't know what to make of the hypnosis.
After my initial sighting, I did read quite a few science fiction books, and it is quite possible that that part of the hypnotic regression has got jumbled up in my mind. But I must stress that I did see a UFO that night. Make no mistake about that. I definitely saw what I saw, and nobody on this earth will ever tell me any different.
So, are the people of Todmorden receiving visits from outer space? The town now has its own observatory, with telescopes trained on the skies.
We recently had reports of lights moving around in the sky which turned out to be nothing more than a local laser show. Also, we have to be rather cautious because we live under the flight path of 2 major airports, Heathrow and Manchester. And locally, Manchester is a problem in as much as we have lights coming in on incoming aircraft which give the impression of UFOs in the sky.
But most UFO witnesses dismiss the obvious explanations.
It was not an aircraft. I got into my van and made radio inquiries regarding this. I still saw the blue light in the sky. I made inquiries with the Army, the RAF, the Civil Aviation Authority, and nothing was in the sky at that time.
A less conventional theory is that the geology of the area can produce strange sights.
There are many reservoirs and quarries in the Todmorden area, and the local rock has a high concentration of quartz crystals. Scientists have found that this can produce an electrical signal, and on a grand scale this might turn out to be glowing masses of energy which can be seen as UFOs. It's also been found that this can affect the human mind and make people see images.
I saw what I saw. That object was real. If I got out of the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone bang.
Strangely enough, even the scientists are now coming round to the view that the people of Todmorden are seeing something.
2 friends and I were observing and saw an object which had classic flying saucer shape. We checked to make sure the telescope we were originally using didn't have optical defects, and there was no problem there. Much as it's difficult to believe that it was of extraterrestrial origin, to this date we have no rational scientific explanation for what it was.
Before his close encounter, PC Alan Godfrey had been injured on duty. A hospital consultant said he'd be unable to have any more children. After his experience, the effects were reversed, and Alan Godfrey had a son.
We're going to delve a little bit more into Alan Godfrey's particular incident, but to answer the skeptic's claims, I think in Alan Godfrey's case it has everything I mean, Alan was a serving police officer on duty at the time. He had several commendations, and I've spoken to Alan on a number of occasions, and you can't meet a more down-to-earth chap. And I have to say, I would not like to have encountered him in his official capacity in any way, shape or form. He's no nonsense. I mean, he'll tell you, Alan, you know, if I'd had a brick, I could have thrown it at that thing and it would have gone clang. Or if I had a gun, I could have shot it and it would have gone bong. You know, there's no doubt about that whatsoever. And, I mean, this is Todmorden, 1980. OK, it's the early hours of the morning, but he was actually on the patrol car at the moment. So to answer the skeptics' claims that, you know, abduction accounts always happen in remote areas, you know, by, you know, people who are uneducated idiots, for want of a better phrase. We have a journalist here from Radio Leeds, with the greatest respect. He asked where we'd all escape from today. Alan Godfrey hadn't escaped from anywhere. He was the kind of people who put people behind bars. But the first we learnt about Alan's particular incident was from a long-standing publication called the Flying Saucer Review. You saw Jenny Randall's been interviewed there. She wrote a piece called, you know, A Policeman's Lot, as simple as that. And there were some physical artifacts as well concerning the case, but this is a drawing that Alan made of the object he saw on the road. Sorry, I'll go back. Here. It was diamond shaped. He had a bank of windows or panels across the centre of it, and the underneath seemed to be spinning. And they briefly alluded to debris on the road in that particular interview we did for television. You could see all the leaves had swirled, and it had been raining that night, but that particular patch of tarmac was now dry. There were some physical characteristics. This is a close-up of Alan's police boot, which had a large split on it afterwards, which wasn't there the night before. And he also had a burn on the instep of his foot that he couldn't account for. This is Alan drawing the object himself. And again, if you saw the hypnosis, Harry Harris mentioned that he saw a tall being, a tall man. Well, later on in the hypnosis, he actually calls the man Joseph. And this is Alan's drawing of the entity here. And here again is the size relative to that particular incident. What is sad about all this is that, you know, Alan, with permission from his chief constable, eventually went on the record via the media, and it ended up costing him his job. He lost his job as a result. Didn't lose it straight away, but eventually was retired from the police office, the police force. So there are consequences for people going on the record, and, you know, Alan suffered as a result. Now, as I pointed out at the beginning, the incidents of alien abductions happen all over the country, all over the UK. An extremely well-known and well-documented incident took place here, Avely in Essex, on the 27th of October in 1974. From this occasion, it wasn't just one person, it was actually a whole family. It was John Day, his wife Sue, and their 2 children. This is John. I interviewed John at length when he'd moved from the area and was living in Suffolk. Now, John, again, is an artist. He's a carpenter, but he makes the wonderful dolls' houses for a living. Now, at the time, John and his wife and family had been to visit their in-laws at their house, just quite nearby to where they live. It was only about 20 minutes away. Remember, this is 1974. So they wanted to drive home, not too late. There was a particular play they wanted to watch on television that evening, so it was a familiar route. They wanted to get back off home. So they set off, the 2 children in the back of the car. Familiar route that they'd taken all the time, you know, they knew the place, the area like the back of their hand. On the way there, they encountered a green mist. They'd seen these strange lights in the sky, and they went through a green mist, and the radio began to spark and play up, so they switched it off, and came out the other side of the mist into the village of Avely and home. Put the children to bed, sat down in front of the television to watch this particular television play, and it had finished. And in those days, no satellite television, no 24-hour TV that was giving the off-air signal. I mean, there was no TV at all. I mean, John couldn't understand why this had taken so long to get home. He even phoned the speaking clock. Didn't believe the time on his watch. He rang the speaking clock to confirm the time. This is just an artist's impression of John in an old car called a Vauxhall Wyvern, believe it or not. I don't know what one of those is. I'm far too young. But he can't. Well, so you've got one, Russ? All right. Russell still drives them when he says, if you didn't hear him. But so that night, John and Sue were plagued by what can only be described as nightmares. Both found it hard to sleep, and almost instantaneously the following morning they recounted the events of this period of missing time. They both remembered it almost simultaneously. But not only did they remember it, it also seemed to have a life-changing event. Again, almost overnight they became interested in environmental issues which they hadn't been previously, and which they relate back directly to this experience. Now, it's a long and complicated series of events that John and Sue related, so we only have time to touch on the briefest of things here. But consciously, one of the things that stuck in his mind is as they were driving through this mist, as they came out the other side of it, there was a bump. The car bumped as if it had gone over something. And his wife Sue was in the passenger seat, leaned across to him and said, "Are you all here?" And he didn't quite catch what that meant until later on. Now, they claim, you know, there was no hypnosis involved here, unlike Alan Godfrey. They remembered most of this, that they were indeed taken on board this vehicle, this UFO, whatever you would like to call it, and they encountered two different types of beings. This is one of their drawings, not too dissimilar to what Alan described, but very tall, very human looking, you know, in a white suit of some description, with a mask over the face. But the peculiar thing about these beings were their eyes. They were actually pink. They had pink irises in their eyes. But apart from that, they looked pretty much human. And this is one of John's original drawings. They also encountered these particular beings, rather ugly, squat, bat-like things. The tall human beings seemed to be in control, if you like. They were directing things, and he was like the subservience. They were doing the whatever. They underwent a medical procedure of some sort. These are artist's impressions of what these beings looked like with the pink eyes. Now, these creatures at one point even ended up in Doctor Who, believe it or not, but they actually took it from this particular case. But they were given, like many of the abductees who claim these experiences or encounter these experiences, they were given a tour of the vehicle itself. And John and Sue were of no exception. Even so, in this drawing is the engine room, the propulsion system. Now, there's almost a paranormal aspect to this particular incident as well, because John and Sue were in a kind of a cargo bay, if you like, and they could look down on their car. Their car was there in this bay, but they could actually see themselves in the car. It was almost as if they're having some kind of out-of-body experience, looking down on themselves. And this is a drawing that they did of it. It's a bit blurred, so you'll have to excuse that. But the thing about the bump on the road was when they could actually watch the car being lowered back to the road, and as it hit the road, Sue turned around to check that everyone was there. So there's a lot to it. You know, we don't have time to go into it here, but the point I'm trying to make, this wasn't one person. It's a family group. Avely in Essex is only 40 or 50 miles from London. It's not in the middle of nowhere. And I asked John, like he did Alan. You know, Alan would say in a typical bluff Yorkshire way that he could hit that thing. And I asked John the same. You know, was this physically real, John? You know, people talk about hallucinations and alternate states of consciousness, and he says, as far as I'm concerned, Philip, yes. You know, I could hit it, touch it, feel it, smell it. It was physically real, but there seemed to be some other paranormal, for want of a better phrase, aspect to the whole list of experiences. Coming a bit closer to home, I lived for many years in Batley, not that far from here, and a few years back we set up a little answer phone service where people could phone in and relate their sightings, and the very first phone call was this lady, Jane Murphy. Shows you how long ago it was. And she said, you know, I've had a few sightings, and that was about all she would say. So a colleague of mine who I thought was going to be here today, called Andy Roberts, went to interview Jane at length, and we soon realised that it wasn't just a sighting of something unusual. Jane had a history stretching back many years of alien encounters, alien abductions. I'll recount some of them. I mean, she's just an average, ordinary housewife, and I don't mean that in any derogatory fashion. She, you know, married with a little girl, nice pleasant cul-de-sac they lived in. You know, husband was a car mechanic, and at the age of 16, Jane had had a UFO sighting, seen some strange lights. When she reached her early 20s, now got her daughter and living with her husband, things took a quite dramatic turn. She remembers waking up one night in bed with these strange beings around her, and somehow they took her to some fields nearby where Jane lives. There's a big area of open space behind the housing estate, and in that field was a UFO. This is Jane's house. The field lies just behind the houses. And she reckons, in no uncertain terms, she was taken on board this thing. She was given a wash. She was made to bathe in some kind of implement that seemed to fit her body perfectly, as if it was almost made for her. It was designed for her. It wasn't by chance. And again, Jane was shown around this thing. This is the field in question. It was here. She described the beings as being small, squat, not particularly attractive, but the one thing she could remember is the big black eyes. These are Jane's sketches of the creatures. The big black eyes almost seemed hypnotic. She was given something to drink and returned whence she came, but Jane's experience didn't stop there. This went on year in, year out. So a natural reaction, I think, she thought, well, I must be mad. I must be going off my head. She told her husband and her family. They didn't know what to do. So Jane actually went to her local GP, her local doctor, told the doctor. And this was a time when, I think if any housewife went to the doctor, there was prescribed tranquilizers. And that's exactly what he did. He gave her the pet pills. And he said, take these, Jane, twice a week or whatever, and the experiences will disappear, which of course they didn't. And she went back to the doctor in no uncertain terms and told him what he could do with his pills. Now there was again physical aspects to some of Jane's experiences. She called me one day, and I lived quite nearby. There'd been an experience overnight. This is the back of Jane's neck. She's leaning forward with her hair pulled up, and there's these big welts on the back of her neck. It's like a Y-shaped mark here that weren't there before. She hadn't been, up to any activities that could cause this. And so it's a little physical aspect to the whole subject. And again, I asked Jane, and again with the greatest respect, she's no Einstein, but I said, Jane, is this real? Is it physically real? And as far as she's concerned, absolutely 100%. There's no question about it at all. She doesn't know what it is. She doesn't call them aliens or spacemen or anything like that. Just these weird and wonderful experiences that happen. And I took Jane to meet a psychologist, a chap called Dr. John Shaw at Manchester University. And John gave her a full, clean bill of health. She wasn't suffering from any psychological problems. She wasn't schizophrenic. She was just a normal person like the rest of us. So, that's Jane, and it's a very puzzling series of events. And as far as I'm aware, they're still ongoing. I lost contact with Jane when I moved from the area, but as far as I'm aware, they're still ongoing. But she learned to accept it. It didn't come to any real harm, and she just got on with the rest of her life. I've interviewed many people who've had these experiences up and down the country, and I'm often asked if there's any one particular person or incident that sticks in your mind. Well, it's this young man. I've changed his name. It's David Thomas, we call him, and it's Pwllheli. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, North Wales. And an alarming event that literally terrified the living daylights out of this young man. Here he is. This is David, actually at the scene of the incident. Now, when I went to meet David and interview him, I asked him if he'd show me the area where it happened so I could take some photographs. Didn't realise, the kind of trauma he'd been through. And you can almost see it on the picture. He just didn't want to be there. He just did not like being in the area. It really did give him the willies. Now, what happened to David at the time, this is the area in question, he was unemployed like most of North Wales was through the Mrs Thatcher's administration. He'd been to a friend's house, walking home, what he called on the main road, about 1 o'clock in the morning. I don't think you and I living around here would call it a main road, it was unlit. And up ahead in the field he could see a light, like a glow in the field, and there's a small, we call it a snicket, small little snicket running through this field. And part of him felt compelled to go and take a look at this, but another part of him said, don't go there. But curious young lad, he was only 18 at the time, had to take a look. And this is what he saw. He says in the field was a vehicle on the ground, almost looking, not too dissimilar from the kind of space shuttle type thing. And there were beings with helmets on, that shaped like a 50p piece. He's not saying their heads were that shape, it was some kind of helmet, and he was actually peeking through the bushes at them when one of them grabbed him from behind and took him towards this thing. There's no recollection of actually going on there. The next thing he remembers is waking up on a bed, and he thinks they were actually flying, they were moving, because on a screen he could see the stars and planets disappearing in the distance. I don't know if he actually saw that, it was some kind of projection. Now, David's main interest at that time was his girlfriend and rock music, and he had his cassette player with him. And these beings took the cassette from him and put it in some kind of console, and out came the music, and he said it was the most surreal thing he'd ever experienced. He's in this otherworldly environment with AC/DC blasting away, you know. And now when you talk to David, you talk to him about, this time when I interviewed him, he found employment, fortunately. It's just like any teenager, talk about his friends, his girlfriend, his work, you know, the music he liked, no problem. But when you turn to this subject, his whole demeanour changed. It terrified him, and I use that word in the correct manner. It absolutely terrified him. This is another artist's impression of the incident. The only thing David says is wrong with this is he would never wear a tie. You know, 18, never wear a tie. And again, he was given messages of doom and gloom about the future of the earth. Sometimes that's like an underlying theme with abductions. If you remember, John Day became interested in environmental issues. Well, so did David, but in a different way. He said after the incident, he would write spontaneous poetry, and he swore me never to tell any of his friends that he actually wrote poetry. And he said he'd be at work and he'd just have to write it down, but it all was related to environmental issues, which he'd never ever previously been interested in. Now, David was found literally staggering down the road sometime later, and he's had no hypnosis. He remembered every single word of this. And he was picked up by the local police force. They found him staggering down the road, and they took him home. Now, he lived with his mum, single parent, and he told his mum what happened, and he was petrified. Now, she had no idea what to do, so the next day she went to the local library and found the address of a UFO group in Oxford. And she phoned them, spoke to them at length. It was a group called Contact International. And they had several telephone conversations, and she was arranging for them to come and speak to David. And he just couldn't sleep. He was plagued by nightmares. So she literally one night stuck him in the car, and it was snowing, and she drove all the way to Oxford and turned up on the doorstep of Contact International, a chap called Derek Mansell, with David cowering in the back, literally cowering in the back of the car. And that's how it affected him. Now, I did say that David had had no regressive hypnosis, and that's absolutely correct. But what he had to have eventually was hypnotherapy. Down the months and years that followed, he was still traumatised by the events, that he would have nightmares and they would keep him awake, as simple as that. So he had to have hypnotherapy to remove the fear of this particular incident. And when I wrote the book, Without Consent, back in 1994, out of courtesy, David's in it, I sent him a copy, and he wouldn't read it for a further 3 years. He was still that frightened of the events in question. He never even opened the pages. He'd since grown up, got married, and had a family of his own. But he made a real impression on me, this young man. You know, I spoke to my friend and colleague Malcolm Robinson some time back about when you investigate certain incidents, and I asked him the question, so when you speak to someone, is it what they have to tell you that makes an impression on you, or is it the person themselves? And Malcolm said the same as me. It's the actual individual themselves, and the same goes with David. You know, he made a real impression on me. I was speaking to the lady from Radio Leeds earlier on. I don't know if she's still here, but I mentioned an incident that's pretty much closer to home again. A lot of Yorkshire people in here. I'm born and bred in Yorkshire, and we all know Ilkley Moor, Bartat, or not. But an incident took place there on the 1st of December 1987 with, again, a former police officer called Philip Spencer. It's a rather poor picture, but does anyone here know Ilkley Moor at all? Yeah. There's a part of Ilkley Moor called White Wells. There's some buildings, some white buildings. And you can walk, as a footpath takes you over White Wells and up over the moors. Now, Philip Spencer, 7:15 in the morning, was taking a shortcut over the moors. He was going to visit his father-in-law in a local village. It's a route he'd taken several times, knew it well, and he always used to carry a little kit bag with him. In that bag he'd have a little camera, compass, you know, maybe a bite to eat, you know, a few bits and pieces. Off he went. It was still dark, you know, this is December. Over White Wells, up the track, and in front of him he saw a little green man. That's the only way I can describe it. I've argued down the years that little green men is an invention of the tabloid press. He saw a little green man. He chased it into this hollow. Ran after it, chased it into this hollow, and it stood here. So he grabbed his camera, took one picture, and the thing shot off again, and this is an L-shaped hollow, so it goes round into here. So he ran after it. When he ran round the corner, no sign of the creature, but there is the archetypical flying saucer, and off it went. So, this is the hollow, this is where it was. It's in actually a prehistoric quarry. It's an old quarry on the moors. So Philip thought, I used the term again to the lady reporter, hellfire, you know, literally. What do I do now? And he still wasn't sure about what he'd seen, so he thought, I'll go and get this picture developed. Now there wasn't a 1-hour processing lab in Ilkley at the time, but there was one he knew about in Keighley. So he turned round, went back down the moor, and he noticed something strange right away. It wasn't dark anymore. Now mind, this is 7:15 on a December morning. It was light. And a couple of hours had gone by, which is it only takes 20 minutes walk down from there. I've been on this. I took these pictures. I've been there. I know how long it takes. He caught the bus to Keighley, to the 1-hour processing lab. He even used the pictures up on the rest of the film, taking pictures of any damn thing before he got there. And lo and behold, the creature's on the film. It's there. Sometime later he contacted local investigators and the story came out. Now Philip also went under regressive hypnosis at a later date. He told similar accounts of being taken on board, medical experiments, warnings of environmental disaster here on Earth. And here's the picture. This is the little green man on Ilkley Moor. There it is. Chased it into the hollow and round the corner. There it is. Now the picture's been analysed, you know, around the world, quite literally. Whatever that thing is, it is there in the landscape. It's not something that's been added afterwards. It's not been digitally enhanced in any way. That's the little green man on Ilkley Moor. Have a close-up. You know, it's not the greatest quality of film, but it was only a little small camera. Nothing sophisticated. And Philip handed over the film to investigators, gave them the negatives. He never asked for any money, didn't want any publicity. He'd been in the police force and was hoping to go back into the police force, so he didn't want any publicity. Make of it what you will. It's an artist's impression of the UFO that was seen at the time. There's a friend of mine called Rob Townsend that made these for us. A little bit of a close-up of what the being may have looked like, and its hands. And we've recently had the picture, you know, enhanced again, and it's there. It is in the landscape. I think the Daily Star rang the picture and they said it was an insurance man. Not going to sell many insurance policies on Ilkley Moor, I don't think. Whatever it is, it's not an insurance man carrying his briefcase. You know, make of it what you will. But it's all part and parcel of the UFO subject, of the alien abduction subject. It's just a drawing of what the thing may have looked like. How accurate it is, I don't know. Again, speaking to the lady from Radio Leeds, we talked about what abductions may be. Jenny Randall's alluded to one or two things in that short video piece we played. Now, there are those who'll say, yeah, you know, we're dealing with real aliens from wherever, space, time, whatever. And what I did when I was researching the book Without Consent, I actually asked the abductees themselves, what do you think was the nature and origin of your experience? And I was quite surprised. Some of them said, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, no question about it. These are beings from another world have come here to do whatever. Don't know what the whatever is, but that's it. But there's a couple more said, I don't believe that at all. I think it's some kind of spiritual experience. There was one lady I interviewed from Northampton. After the event, she became a spiritual healer. And she relates it directly back to her experience. Now, I spoke to David Thomas from North Wales. What do you think it was, David? He thought it was the Russians. You know, I don't believe in aliens, but this was nuts and bolts technology, and at the time, you know, the Russians were the bad guys, so it must have been them. He didn't believe that, honestly. It was just his way of kind to rationalise it. But there are many particular theories about the abduction. I've never had an experience, never seen anything untoward, and I'm looking forward to the presentation later this afternoon from Anne and Jason, to hear, with the greatest respect, straight from the horse's mouth. You know, they've experienced this kind of thing, know far more about it than I ever will. But some people think, well, it's some kind of myth, it's folklore, it's mythology. It doesn't denigrate the experience in any way, but there's more to it than just beings from another world. The skeptics will tell you that it's all fantasy. You know, sleep paralysis. I don't believe that for a moment. I haven't found any evidence to support that. Or that they're all, you know, sensation-hungry people looking to make a fast buck. It cost Alan Godfrey his job. And in my experience, the vast majority of people who have these experiences don't want any publicity, don't go on the record, and won't allow us to use their real names. So that's another idea. In recent years, started by a chap called Helmut Lammer, Dr. Helmut Lammer in Austria, he thinks there's something even more sinister, that the abductions are nothing to do with aliens, are nothing to do with fantasy, but it's actually some kind of military experiment. Military abductions, he calls them. He shortens it and he calls it MILABs, short for military abductions. Now we know, you know, history teaches us that, certainly in America, that the intelligence services are quite capable of doing literally anything. They have experimented on their own troops. They even fed the troops hallucinogenic drugs during the Vietnam War. So I would never totally rule it out, but I don't think those nice Brits would do anything like this. So, but it's an interesting aspect that it just goes to show how the subject can be studied, and new takes and a new look at it. Jenny mentioned earthlights, balls of light, balls of plasma given off by the rocks that are electrically charged, and if you get too close to it, basically it scrambles your brains. Now they have tried to simulate this in the laboratory, and they have had some interesting results, but nothing like the abduction events. This creates mild sensation. A chap called Dr. Michael Persinger in Canada, he built a helmet, put it on, it stimulates your brain, and you feel weird and wonderful things, but no full-blown abduction scenario has ever emerged from it. But it's an interesting area of research nonetheless. And of course the skeptics think it's all baloney anyway, no matter what. I like this particular joke. As many alien abductions just turn out to be some idiot with a huge flashlight. Well, you know, I don't think so. I don't think so. It's a puzzling, intriguing aspect of the whole UFO subject. I've tried my damnedest down the years to try and, for me personally, to try and get to the bottom of it, and you know, failed to do so. That's why I wrote the book. I wrote this book back in 1984. There's none. It's not a sales pitch. There's none on sale here today of this particular copy. And it was to highlight that whatever lies behind abductions, that the people who have these experiences are just like you and me. They're ordinary members of the general public who come from all walks of life, from all over the country. Most of the time they're just about their everyday chores when these experiences happen. People like Alan Godfrey, it's a one-off, but then on the other hand, you have people like Jane, there's a whole series of events. They seem to happen year in, year out, without any resolution. It's been read far and wide as my book, by the way. It has spread. Perhaps reading up on a few relatives here, I don't know. But it is, you know, you can get a copy of it via the UFO Data website. I think Russell's just put a copy up here. There is a copy. We have made it available on a CD-ROM, or you can download it. Yeah. So what lies behind abductions, I don't know. I know the abductees have not been released from anywhere. They are, by and large, sane, individual, law-abiding members of the public who've got more to lose than they have to gain by going on the record. And I think we should be grateful of this afternoon's presentation. And I'd like to thank you for your time. Thank you very much.